everybody. This is Pastor Brady Henderson of the First Baptist Church of Gaston, located in the Midlands of South Carolina, and you are tuning into the Menorah Podcast. The Menorah Podcast seeks to share the light, speak the light, and send the light of Jesus Christ all across the airwaves of the internet and all podcast platforms. And Alan, it's hard to believe it is episode 43, and it is already December the 5th. Christmas time here is in full swing, Alan.
Yep, we are about to get to the end of the year. Of course, we're just a few episodes out of finishing up season one.
Yeah. Season one, we started this back in February, and God has certainly blessed it. And just to kind of give you a little heads up, of course, we've got an episode today, a treat for you. We're going to be having a conversation with Associate Pastor Steve Kittrell for you to get to know him a little bit better and hear his heart and hear his experiences, his testimony, and his philosophy on ministry and much more. And this, more than likely, is going to be a two-parter, so we'll have the second part for you next week on episode 44. And then, depending on our conversation, we might have a three-parter on the 19th or something else. We'll let you know. But do want you to know we will not have an episode of Menorah on December 26th and January the 2nd. So we're going to take a break for the Christmas season, and then we'll start season 2 of Menorah on January the 9th. So we're seated here today with Reverend Steve Kittrell. Pastor Steve is what we call him around here. And Brother Steve, thank you for coming on today.
Amen. Glad to be here. Looking forward to it.
So we used to call this an interview. We've interviewed a lot of people, but we've changed that to conversation. So we just want to talk to you, and it just happens to be recorded. So that folks can listen and get to know you a little bit better. So, Pastor Steve, I guess, why don't you start off with telling us how you got here? It's kind of a cool story of how you started coming to our church, and we'll go back to, yesteryear and talk about some things early on. But just talk to us about how did you find First Baptist Gaston, and why did you come here?
Well, I retired January of 23, and several folks at Laurel who were familiar with what God was doing at First Baptist Church under your ministry encouraged us that we ought to at least try to visit and so on and so forth. And I think the very first Sunday after I retired was the first Sunday that we visited here. And on the way out the door that morning after church, I stopped to shake hands and introduce myself to you. And the first thing out of your mouth was, "Yes, I know who you are. You just retired, didn't you? and we're looking for an associate pastor." And I thought, I told you then, I said, nope, I am retired officially. And no, and the thought just kept running through my mind. No.
Yeah.
And, that was the end of that conversation or whatever. And then it wasn't too much later that we visited again. I can't remember if it was the next week or the following week or whatever. And then we just visited several other churches in the area around where we live down in St. Matthews and didn't do anything for, I guess, the first 3 months as far as ministry was concerned after I retired. Mm-hmm. And then immediately started, after I decided that I was ready to preach again, started preaching at Northwood Church in the association, and was with that congregation for about, I guess, 9 out of the next 12 months. And
then it was a good little while.
Did some preaching a while for Florence Baptist and so on and so forth. But God was good. We just felt at home here, even though we weren't here on Sunday mornings. I wasn't preaching on Wednesday nights, and so we just started coming on Wednesdays and got real regular. And everybody around us, kept encouraging us, why don't y'all come on and join? Why don't y'all come on and join? And But I was preaching almost every Sunday. Brother John O'Kane is my pastor for many years and my mentor still, and love him to death. And he made a comment, because he's 10 years older than I am, so he's really old. But he said that, out of all the pastors that I know that have retired, you are busier than any pastor I've ever known.
I agree with that.
God was just blessing us and using us here and there. And then the church hired an associate pastor, and Brother Chris was, with us for, I guess, almost a year or a little over a year or whatever. I can't remember. Something like that.
Right at that, yeah.
And then the Lord called him elsewhere, and I was again asked that question about being, the associate pastor. And again, I said, no, I'm just not ready for that. I'm just fine right where I am. I'm enjoying preaching at wherever the Lord, opens a door on Sunday mornings and being free on Wednesday nights, basically. And I was just really enjoying that. And then the Lord, I started really thinking about it. You approached me about it a couple times. And each time I told you, no, I'm just not ready for that. And
Hey, I didn't give up.
I know you didn't.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's some bad qualities about me, but persistence, hey, I just don't give up.
Hey, listen, I don't know that that's a bad quality, that's for sure. I wish we had more people who were more persistent in their walk with Jesus and their service of Jesus. But anyway, after that, we talked a couple of times, and I told you one Sunday morning, I said, well, I'll really begin to pray about this. I don't even think I had said anything to Sandy about it. And Sandy, my wife, said, you really need to think about, going on staff with Brady. I think Brady could really use you. I think he really wants you. I said, well, I know he wants me.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm not too sure, the Lord can use me in that situation or whatever. So anyway, Sandy and I talked about it, and then I got really serious about talking to the Lord about it. And after a couple of weeks, it was pretty obvious to me that this was maybe something that he was wanting for me.
Yeah.
And I've learned over the years that even when I don't want something for me, if I come to the conclusion that the Lord wants something for me, then I have to understand and realize that he's got a better plan.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but,
Yeah.
And my main concern with not really wanting to come on staff, because, for the last 2 years, basically, we've watched and we've seen what God is doing here at this church. I just didn't want to come on staff and mess anything up, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah.
And it was kind of ironic that at our last place of service, and I think both of y'all know that, and everybody on this Menorah Podcast probably know it, it's the Laurel Baptist Church. And we just kept praying for God to just break out on us in revival. We've seen revival break out in the churches that we've served in the past, and oh man, it's just an awesome thing to watch and be a part of.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were praying that God would do that again, do that again, do that again, do that again. And of course, our focus was that He would do it at Laurel.
Yeah.
And it just didn't happen. But she didn't stop praying for it. I guess I probably did, but she didn't stop praying for it.
Wow.
And so the Lord just led us out of Laurel and led us here for, like I said, almost 2 years now. As part of this church fellowship, but not a part of this church fellowship, but just enjoying being a part of the revival that God was bringing to this church fellowship and to this community, really.
Yeah.
So, that's how we came, and I finally just came to you and said, okay,
I give
here's
up.
what, and then you said, hey, write out your job description of how you want to do it and how you want to work, and I said, okay. And I said, so I'll get to do everything I love to do, and y'all gonna pay me for it?
Yeah.
And you said, yeah, if that's what. And I said, great.
Yeah.
So that's where we are today, and
Yeah.
I'm loving it. We left the service this morning and took off and went out visiting, and it was kind of a fruitless situation because everybody that we called and tried to make contact with to go visit, they weren't home or something else. Or
Oh, yeah.
So we ended up going by and seeing one of our former members at Laurel.
Yeah.
Had a great visit with her because we only had so much time before we had to get to Sandy to the dentist office or whatever. So,
Well, Pastor Steve, you mentioned coming and everything, and it's really neat how God has brought y'all here, us together, and everything. Cause in December of 22, 2 years now, church voted unanimously to call an associate pastor because of the growth and everything. Hadn't had one since 2003 when Mitch Marsh was here, and he was minister of music / associate. And, I knew of who you were because, 36 years at the same church, that speaks for itself. And that says a lot. 50 years, I believe 50 years in the ministry, and then 36 at one church. That's just incredible. Right here, not too far from here in Pine Ridge, West Columbia community. So that, I wanted you bad from the get-go, and he was number one on my list, and personnel committee was great. They gave me free reign, go get who you want kind of thing. And didn't work out. God brought Pastor Chris here, had a plan with all of that. And then Pastor Chris unexpectedly, well, not unexpected to God, but unexpected to us. God called him somewhere else, and I was back to square one, and I was like, I got to figure this out. So obviously the interim route, and we've discussed it. It could become a permanent thing, remaining part-time, but could become a permanent thing if the Lord leads that way. But, really wanted to go the interim route just to see how it would work with, if you were comfortable with it, if we were comfortable with it. And, of course, I don't know how you feel, Pastor Steve, but it's been awesome. You've only been officially a month, and, my goodness. I think I told you this off air a few weeks ago at a meeting. I think it's really cool, and I think Alan could see this. It's really cool how I think our gifts complement one another. We're not the same. We're different.
Just like this.
Yeah, exactly. And I just think that is amazing how God brought that together. And I will tell this testimony. The day that you called me, you had gotten off the golf course. Pastor Steve's a big golfer. We've golfed before many times. I got to get back into it this spring. I got to get back. But I prayed. It was a Tuesday morning, which I believe is when you usually go and play. Right. I was praying that morning in my quiet time, and this is exactly what I prayed. I said, Lord, I know you want Pastor Steve to be our associate, but you got to hit him upside the head. Because, you had already told me no, and we were already trying to figure something out, and you and I had sat down and talked about it, and I was totally respectful of it. I understood completely. Lord willing, I'll be in that spot one day, hopefully, and, hopefully I'll make it and get to be able to maybe retire. I don't know. I asked the Lord, I said, hit him upside the head. Don't kill him. Don't kill him. But hit him upside the head, and then that afternoon, I think it was, and I kept the voicemail. That afternoon you called me. I saw it, and I said, wow, Lord, because you said you want.
That's the way he works, isn't it?
Yeah, you said, I'm riding through Gaston. I'd like to come talk to you. And I said, well, Lord, I know what this is about. And
and that's what it was about.
That's just kind of how it all started. And when you left, I got on my knees and cried to the Lord and said, Lord, you're good.
Amen.
And I think it's a wonderful thing. And Alan, I want to ask you, and obviously since Pastor Steve and I have talked a lot, it's going to be a two-parter. Might be a three-parter because we want to hear a little bit about his testimony, his education, his growing up. But Alan, as a lifelong congregant and member here, God's obviously got his hand all over him. But I want to go back, before I ask you a question, I want to go back to the complimentary thing. As I told a committee the other week, I feel like I'm at my best when I get to focus on equipping people. There's other equipping things that I want to do. I like to write. I like to do all that kind of stuff. And I also like administration, everything that falls under that. And I like visiting, but sometimes visiting can take away from being at my best to equip. And so having somebody that loves that, but that can also preach very, very well and do all of that, it allows me to focus on what I feel like I'm better at when it comes to those other things. So, it's just, the last month has just been awesome. Hannah and I can't talk about how awesome God has been in bringing Pastor Steve and Sandy. And I think he's more relatable than I am. I think he's more personable. I think he's more warm and fuzzy. And you got to have that. You got to have somebody that is a little, I'm not going to say I'm iron-fisted. I'm not saying that. But so it's good to have somebody that balances me out, so to speak. I wanted to get your thoughts on that as a member. I know you're on staff, but also as a member.
It's always a lot easier to be approached by somebody that's warm and fuzzy. I think the majority of our congregation, it's been many years since we've really had this level of pastoral care. So it is very impactful for our congregation, for a pastor to talk to us. When I was a child, little boy, it was a big thing for a pastor to come home with us for Sunday lunch.
Right.
Yeah. And that happened regularly.
Right.
And it's different. Well, and the same thing when I was growing up, we prepared for Sunday on Saturday. We had chores, and we made sure that our life was ready for Sunday morning.
Right.
Because I knew that I wasn't going to do anything on Sunday but go to church twice.
Right.
I've always been relatively close to pastors. Probably Rex was the first one that I got really close to because I was retired.
Right.
And was able to spend a little more time here. and I do spend a good bit of time here each week. So, and a lot of times the pastor and I, we get into all kind of stuff. Podcasts and videos are just part of it.
Yeah.
I try to be respectful of his time because I understand, we've had the conversation many times, what his role is. And so I try to fit within that. Hopefully that is a goal of mine, is to not put more pressure on you guys to meet with or be with or whatever.
Well, I think two of the things that you've mentioned repeatedly is time and relationship.
Yeah.
And you can't have the one without the other. I'm not an extrovert. I'm an introvert, naturally, okay? And so when I deliberately and intentionally want to spend time with somebody, okay, it's for the purpose of building a relationship.
Yeah. Effort.
And if you go back and look at Acts, and this is where Brady's coming from. When you go back and look at Acts, when the apostles came to the church at Antioch and said, "Now look," or in Jerusalem, and said, "Now look, here's the situation that we got. Some of the folks over here are feeling neglected, so choose you out some men who can take care of the day-to-day ministry within the church, so that we can focus on what?
The word.
And
Prayer.
exactly, okay, the word and prayer. And since I've come on staff now, and I started it actually, I think a month and a half before I actually came on staff.
Yeah.
I got a copy of the pictorial directory, and every day since then, I have prayed for every single person in that directory. And so now on Sunday mornings, I can walk up to somebody and I can say, "Hey, Joe, how are you doing this morning?" And they look at me like, "I have never met you before. How do you know my name? How is it that you're calling me personally by my name? And you know my wife's name and my children's names?"
Yep.
It's because of the fact of that pictorial directory.
Sometimes people don't understand the importance of things like that.
Exactly. And what I'm doing when I call them by name is I'm trying to let them know, look, in my heart and in my mind and before the Lord, I've already established a relationship with you.
With the Father, yeah.
With the Father.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's a major part of my ministry.
Yeah.
Now, sad to say, the Lord didn't bring me to that reality until I'd been in the ministry probably 15 years or so. I started in October 22nd, 1994. I made a commitment to the Lord that I would spend at least 1 hour a day in prayer before Him, interceding for folks.
Wow.
And if He would enable me, I would never lay my head down at night again without having spent at least 1 hour in prayer with Him. Okay? Now, that first 6 months or so, there were a couple of times I laid my head on that pillow and I was just dozing off and ding!
Yeah.
Oh, Father, I'm so... And I'd get up and I'd have to walk, make laps in the house so I wouldn't fall asleep while I was praying for folks.
Oh, man.
Okay?
Yeah. That's
And
hard.
and since that day, October 22nd, 1994, I've missed one day.
Wow.
One day.
Wow.
And it still bothers me.
Wow.
It still bothers me. It was Mother's Day, 1998. I got up that morning and started my prayer time, but didn't have time to finish it. Okay? And I was going to do it, finish the rest of it that afternoon, that evening, and just got, Mother's Day. You got a lot going on Mother's Day.
Yep.
So, but yeah, and that all I'm saying is by saying that is that Brady is an elder pastor. I'm now the associate, quote, elder pastor. Okay. Apostle, if you would call it that. He's going to focus on the word, teaching, training, equipping. Yeah, and I'm going to focus on prayer and personal relationships. And between the two of us, I think God's going to continue to bless.
I agree. I don't think any church could ask for anything better in a situation like that. I really don't.
That's what I'm thinking. And, and I appreciate you saying that simply because of the fact that when you follow what God's plan and design is, he laid it on the heart of the apostles to say, look, you guys take care of the daily administrative ministry so that the apostles can take care of the preaching and teaching of the word and prayer.
Yep. Well, and I want to add, too, I want to back up. I know we need to wrap up part one, and we'll continue next Thursday. But, Alan mentioned, and this is so true, and I've taught this before, and I think it's not your generation. It's really a generation before you of preachers. Coming out of World War II,
right?
Most preaching before World War II and after World War II, it really had, the last 40 years is really when expository preaching has kind of caught on and become popular. Prior to the 80s, I would argue, expository preaching was few and far between. I'm not saying there were not expository preachers, meaning, book by book, verse by verse. They were mostly topical. And I think Pastor Steve would agree with me. The amount of preparation a topical message takes compared to an expository message is night and day. And so I say that to say, I think preachers, yeah, exactly. I think, shoot from the hip. I think preachers, you're coming out of World War II, and prior to World War II, most everybody in the South had circuit preachers. We didn't have full-time preachers. Right. So we're coming out of World War II, we got more what? Money, right? People are working, they're having kids, they're getting more involved in the church. That World War II generation did not have hardly any control in their life. If they were born in South Carolina, they knew nothing but poverty and hard work. And so the one thing they could control was the church. They could control those things. So now that we have full-time pastor, most churches went from one service every 2 weeks or one service a month, a preaching service, they had Sunday school, to 3 services a week. And my observation or opinion on that is that they're like, man, Brother Steve, we're paying this guy what we would say today, $30,000 a year, which that ain't going to get you much.
Nope.
So we're going to get at least 3 sermons out of him.
Right.
And we're going to want him to do X, Y, and Z because pastoral care wasn't anything that it is today prior to World War II in America. It was, most of the time, funerals were done by loved ones and leaders in the family. They weren't usually done by pastors. And it wasn't expected of them. That wasn't, they were expected to ride around and preach and win people for Jesus. They weren't expected to do and so coming out of World War II, that got into that generation. Right. And so when you were a kid, I know I'm taking a long time to go around this, but when you were a kid, you talk about, the preachers coming home for Sunday lunch and things of that nature. Well, when you've got 3 topical sermons, I hope you're visiting. Because I don't know what else you're doing. Because a topical, I'm literally riding down the road, and I'm thinking, I'm going to talk about adultery. Let me go to the back of my Bible and find the topic of adultery. Okay, I got it. We call those diving board messages. And there are still people that do that today, but I think the longer time goes along, more people actually want to be fed the word and not fed opinions. And so I'm not hating on the World War II generation. Obviously, they were great. I'm not hating on boomers. I'm just trying to point out the fact that obviously they didn't know any better. Even preaching prior to that, circuit preachers were topical too. My great-grandfather, or second great-grandfather, Isaac Henderson, he preached a sermon in 1913 on 3 words in Isaiah. Okay, that's topical. Okay, he found something in Isaiah that fit a topic in his mind, and he ran with it. And I have that sermon in my office. It's written down. So, and I know it was topical, and it was about 8 minutes. That's how long it takes to read his notes, about 8 minutes.
Well, oftentimes the things that we think are so good, we develop those because we remember times when things weren't so good.
Yeah.
And so often we run headlong into some of those things and don't really take time to think them really through. And so you have this big shift to this side, and then 20 years down the road, you're starting to see how the long term, and it's like, okay, we might have overreacted a little, so we're going to shift back a little bit.
Yeah.
And at some point, you are really meeting needs, and it's not necessarily it is as bad. It's just different, but it's a shift in the way things are.
Well, and I think too, yesterday I taught, I'm teaching a new members class, and I've got somebody in there that grew up here, went away for a while, came back, young person, and she told me, or told our class, she said, I love my church, she said, but we've never actually had, outside of Jim Fanning, we have not had expository, book by book preaching. So I think it's important to get back to that. And I know Bill Pauling practiced that, but obviously she wasn't alive then. But she was alive during Jim. So, all right, we're going to wrap up part one. Brother Steve, you stick around. We'll get you for part two. But all our listeners, you got to wait till next week, and we'll get that for you. You're listening to the Menorah Podcast, the podcast that seeks to share the light, send the light, and speak the light of Jesus Christ all across the airwaves of the internet. This has been episode 43 of the Menorah Podcast. We will see you next week.